Hello, my name is Eugenie Maiga. I'm an associate professor of economics at Université Norbert Zongo in Burkina Faso. I'm also a co-PI of the Irish Research Council funded project COGS, which stands for Corruption, Gender and Sustainable Development. It is a collaborative project between Dublin City University and Université Norbert Zongo. As part of this project, we have designed some short courses on corruption, and I'm in charge of speaking to you about corruption and education. The outline of this course is as follows. Corruption and education, we'll look at some background of this relationship, and then we'll turn to definition and types of corruption in the education sector. How does corruption affect education will be the third section before turning to some empirical evidence of the effect of corruption on education. We will end with some policies on how to control corruption in the education sector. Corruption can be defined as the abuse of public power for private gain, and corruption damages both people and economies, and it disproportionately affects the vulnerable people in the society, and it also acts as to widen gender and income inequalities. It is estimated that about 6 billion people live in corrupt countries around the world. This is huge. Such countries grow more slowly, attract less investment, are more unequal and violent, and tend to have higher rates of poverty and child and maternal mortality. Corruption also blocks climate action by protecting the elites and special interest groups such as lobbies, and it also distorts policies. Many countries have signed up to try and achieve the UN, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, and also the goals of the African Union 2063 agenda. And in order to be able to do so, all these countries need to fight corruption. To fight corruption, we need to understand how it prevents people from contributing to sustainable development and enjoying the benefits of progress. It is in this perspective that in our project, we try to identify main mechanisms by which corruption impedes sustainable development, including efforts to provide inclusive education. Education is a component as human capital and is considered as an investment as shown by Baker 1964. Schultz 1961 considers that the impressive growth in the earnings of workers in developed countries was mainly due to the growth of human capital, and that the insufficient investment in people is an obstacle for the progress of poorer countries. Education is a human right, and it has a huge transformative power for both individual lives and economies. And benefits of education do not just uh, it's not just about higher earnings or more secure employment, but it can also have other advantages such as better health, higher life satisfaction, reduced criminal behavior, and greater civic participation. Given all these benefits of education, it is no surprising that the United Nations Development Goals set a specific goal for education, which is SDG number 4, quality education, and the goal is to try and ensure that there's inclusive and equitable access to education and lifelong learning opportunities for all. In addition, the African Union has also set a goal that pertains to this important outcome, economic outcome. So the Agenda 2063 is trying to make sure that the African Union agenda to make sure that countries can have access to universal primary education and gradually improve opportunities to uh, be able to complete other levels of education, namely secondary and higher level of education. And in addition to the Agenda 2063, the African Union Commission has decided to declare 2024 the year of education. The goal is to educate an African fit for the 21st century by building resilient education systems for increased access to inclusive, lifelong, quality, and relevant learning in Africa. Given these goals that were set by all these institutions, we can try and see, okay, what have you achieved so far? And what we can see in terms of progress, there's been some progress in enrollment rates, but the quality of education remains low. And even enrollment rates, even though they improved, they still fall short of international standards. For example, if we consider the period 1973 to 2022, the average gross enrollment rates in primary education, secondary education, and tertiary education in sub-Saharan Africa were respectively 81%, 28.7%, and 4.8.7%. All these rates fall short of the world averages of 98.5%, 59.2%, and 21.4%. So this means that even though we got some progress, there's still work to do. In addition, evidence provided by Glebe and others in 2014 shows that the magnitude of the effect of education and growth is lower in sub-Saharan Africa, which likely reflects the fact that school quality is on average lower in this region. It is not surprising then that both researchers and policymakers are still interested in the determinants of education, because the numbers that we show and the link that corruption can have in this sector shows that it is still important to try and look at the determinants, and especially and specifically considering corruption in one of the determinants of educational attainment. In statistics from Afrobarometer, data show that about 28% of people who access public services, mainly education and health, had paid a bribe during the previous year, which is equivalent to about 130 million citizens in the 35 African countries that were surveyed. This is actually a huge chunk of people who had to pay a bribe to be able to access education and health services. Another interesting statistic is that roughly 55% of African citizens believe that corruption has increased in their country over the past 12 months before the time they were surveyed, while only 23% of respondents had believed corruption had decreased. So this is quite striking. And another interesting fact is that sub-Saharan Africa has been shown to be one of the most corrupt regions in the world, according to Transparency International data. It is for all these reasons that we're trying to look at the links between educational corruption in the education sector in this region. But what is educational corruption? Halak and Poisson 2007 provide the following definition. It is the systematic use of public office for private benefits, whose impact is significant on the availability and quality of educational goods and services, and therefore on access, quality, and equity in education. And this shows that it's very important to study this phenomenon. And corruption can take several forms in the education system, the most direct of which is bribery, and a bribe can be demanded to provide or speed up provision of an educational service, in addition to the official payment. Educational corruption can happen at several levels. in the system. It can happen at the central Ministry of Education level, at the region and district levels, at the school level, at the lecture theatre or lecturer level, and also at the level of international agencies. If we take the Central Ministry of Education level, we have provided here a few examples of ways in which corruption can occur. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but just give a few examples just to illustrate. One way in which corruption can occur at the Central Ministry of Education level is kickbacks on construction and supply contracts, or favoritism in hiring appointments and promotion decisions, or requiring payment for services that should be provided for free. At the region and district levels, one way of in which corruption can occur is overlooking school violations or on inspector visits in return for bribes or favors, or sales for recommendation for higher education entrance, or favoritism in personnel appointments such as headmasters or teachers. For both the Central Ministry of Education level and regional and district levels, financial directors can gamble with school funds. Now, turning to the school level, one way of in which corruption can occur is ghost teachers and employees, or degree and diploma mills. Another way in which corruption can occur is incidents and acceptance of plagiarism and cheating. At the lecturer level, there's siphoning of school supplies and textbooks to the local market. There's also instances on creating the necessity for private tutoring, or there's also incidences of dumbing down of syllabus. At the level of international agencies, corruption can occur in the following forms: payment of bribes, payment of excessive or unnecessary fees to obtain services, skimming from project funds, to do other things than what the money is intended for, allocating or questioning the allocation of project opportunities based on candidate connections rather than on merit. Now we will present this table where Halak and Poisson have summarized the main types of corruption in the education system by providing the definition and examples. We will not go through all of them, but if we take, for example, embezzlement, it is defined as the theft of public resources by public officials. And one example is that educational funds can be used for political campaigns, or school funds are diverted for private interests. If we take favoritism, it's a mechanism of power abuse, implying privatization and a highly biased distribution of state resources. And one example is recruiting administrators based on the membership of a political party, or good marks obtained due to favoritism. So this ends the section on the definitions and types of corruption in the education system. We will now turn to the section on where we look at how corruption can affect education. This graph was constructed using Afrobarometer data, which is a survey on where respondents provide information on demographics and other economic outcomes, but there's a lot of information about corruption perception. So we use that data to try and see the link, correlation between difficulty to obtain school services and paying a bribe for school services. And it turns out that the correlation is positive and highly statistically significant between paying a bribe for public school services and perceived difficulties in access to education. This means that in countries where people pay a bribe for public school services, they had a difficulty accessing education. So this is really something very important to bear in mind, and justify if needs be, while we are focusing on the relationship between corruption and education in this area of the world. A colleague of mine in one of the courses designed as part of the COGS project has already talked about two competing theories on corruption, namely the sand in the wheel hypothesis and the grease in the wheels hypothesis. If we look at the first one, the sand in the wheel hypothesis, it is presented as a situation by which corruption acts to reduce as a strong disincentive to economic activity. So, for example, including demand and supply of education. Corruption can affect inclusive education through reduction of the supply and quality of education, attractiveness and of easy gain and mimicry. Corruption can also reduce the supply and quality of education through the demand for bribes by public officials, and in this case, public officials ask parents to pay a bribe in order to access education services, for example, enrolling children in school. And in that case, the official exercises monopoly power, for example, by determining the number of seats that are available, delaying the deadlines to enroll pupils in school, or simply refusing to accept those pupils. In this case, Schleifer and Vishny in 1993 distinguished between two types of corruption: corruption with theft and corruption without theft. If we take the corruption with theft, if we take the example of bribery, the public official sets a school fee above the normal price by adding a bribe to the official fee that was set by the government, and he pockets this amount of money and returns the official school fees to the state coffers. By doing so, we have an increase in the fees due to this bribe, and then the parents who cannot afford to pay this bribe and their children are worse off because this is a barrier to accessing schooling for those who don't have the means. And this was highlighted by Borka and others in 2017. When teachers or public officials accept bribes to provide educational services, for example, government-funded textbooks or to admit students into classrooms, this will make it more difficult for the country to achieve education for the goal of education for all. When we turn to the case of bribery with theft, in this case, the official undercharges the school fees for the seat requested by the parent, and the official pockets the money without paying anything back to the state. So it means that the official steals the seat, so nothing goes to the state, meaning that there's a higher loss of revenue for the state, which will be unable to increase the supply and quality of education in the long term, in terms of constructing new classrooms, recruiting teachers, and building computer centers, etc. Because the money collected by the bureaucrat is not transferred back where it belongs. That means the state account. So in both cases, corruption is negatively affecting education, either through reducing access to some people who don't have the means to pay the bribe, and also reducing the revenues that the state would have been able to collect to improve infrastructure and all overall services provided for the education sector. We can summarize the way in which corruption negatively affects education, that means the sun in the wheel side of the theory, through several transmission channels. You already talked about mimicry. Some people would like to maybe continue their education up to higher education, getting the highest degrees, but while they see their peers stopping school earlier, but being able to, through mafia means, to get into some position where they can siphon, public funds, use corruption means to get rich, will be less likely to want to continue their schooling because they'll be worse off. They might finish school and not even get a job because they don't have connections. And those who have stopped earlier don't have this, high degrees were able to get enough means to live, to be very well off. So a mimicry effect can occur, and these people will stop school earlier than would have if there were not these opportunities to get rich for corrupt means. Another way at the individual level in which corruption can be have a negative effect is that corruption can increase gender inequality in education. Eh, you know, uh, because corruption acts by increasing has the effect of increasing the cost of education. This can widen the gap between boys and girls because of boys' preference. When the parents don't have enough financial capacity, they will tend to send the boys to school because of entrenched attitudes that place a higher premium on male education. If we stay with parents' decision side, low quality of public education can create incentive for parents to opt for private schools. And in countries where there's enough seats in private schools, um, parents will tend to do so and will be able to send their children there. But those who don't have the means to buy, to pay for school fees in the private sector, would be worse off, which means there's increasing inequality because of lack of access for the parents who don't have enough financial capacity. On the other side of things, if there's not enough seats in the private sector education, um, you know, uh, in a given country, that means there will be congestion in that sector, even if parents have means to send their kids, and this will affect education quality in the end. At the level of student and teacher relationship, awarding of unreasonable grade to parents, to students, and complacency would affect the education quality. If you look at the teacher recruitment side, poor quality of the selected teacher would affect the quality of training the student could receive. And at the level of financial authorities, the position of rent and illicit enrichment can lead to phenomenon of defectors in the education system and refusal of promotion by some agents. So some agents would not want to pursue their education because they already hold pensionable positions. If they get a higher degree, they'll be sent to other positions where they can't act, use corrupt means to get money. Now, at the financial level of a decision-making sphere, the poor allocation of resources can lead to a contraction of the social budget, and the possibility of recruiting more teachers will be reduced, as well as building more schools, purchasing more teaching material, or improving the teaching salary staff. So this is what is called, uh, um, corruption, changing the allocation of public expenditure, because uh, other sectors of public sectors are places where you could do more corrupt uh, activities, and with education don't offer us as many opportunities. We reduce the education sector budget and send it to other sectors where they can use corrupt means to siphon funds. If we now turn to the grease the wheel hypothesis, the grease the wheel hypothesis says that corruption can grease the wheel of an economy by allowing to bypass costly and inefficient regulation and red tape. And in this case, corruption would act as a lubricant for the economic mechanism. And in these circumstances, paying bribes offer a mechanism for overcoming overly centralized bureaucracy, red tape, and long delays in the provision of public goods, such as education. So if you pay a bribe, this would be a more effective way of acquiring public service without negative consequence. But however, we can say that financial incentive can motivate workers to focus more on quantity than on quality when tasks are complex, because quantity is easier to measure. And in this case, for example, if it's happening in the education sector, this would be detrimental, uh, to those who want to use education services. In terms of empirical evidence, both on the negative and positive sides, we can find some papers. For sure, we find more evidence on the negative sides of the relationship between corruption and education, and at different levels, mixed sample of countries, developed countries, developing countries, etc. But what this means is that you have evidence from both sides. So what we can take away from this empirical evidence that is being provided is that it still seems to be mixed. If you can find on both sides evidence, the evidence seems to be mixed, and this highlights the importance of looking at closely at this relationship, especially in Africa, where we have both issues with how the education sector is performing, and also how corruption seems to be increasing, or at least staying at high levels. Now turning to how we can try and control some policy corruptions, we provide here a few policies. Measuring and tracking education sector-specific corruption is critical for progress toward SDG 4. So we should always, this should always be an integral part of the current effort to achieve this goal. Increases in the education expenditure are needed in African countries to achieve SDG 4, and this should be followed by strong efforts to control corruption and to avoid wasting money. You have to move away from direct payments through digitalization, and this can help eliminate the exchange of money at the point of access and reduce corruption. More transparency in the system is also required, and information on usual charges and exemptions should be clear and easily available to everyone. Controlling corruption also requires strong institutions that are willing to proactively collect people's complaints, investigate allegations, and punish corruption. Lastly, economic analysis of corruption suggests that the right combination of increasing the probability of detecting corruption through monitoring and the threat of punishment, all this may help reduce corruption by increasing its costs, as evidenced by Baker and Stigler in 1974. This would benefit the education sectors and other sectors that are affected by corruption. We hope that this was very useful to you. Thank you very much for your kind attention.